My oldest son loves to dig. When we moved into our house, he was about 2.5. I gave him a spot in our yard and told him he could dig as much as he wanted there, and he did, year after year. At one point, he made a cutaway drawing of his excavation. Just beyond the hole, there were full fossilized skeletons just waiting to be discovered. So our kid was very motivated to find what he thought must be lying under that dirt. About 6 years into his hole digging, he had gone down so far he could stand up in it and had started to tunnel. And he and his friend from down the street talked about how they were building a hotel. He'd come into the house with the dirtiest hair from all that digging. One day, I casually told my uncle, an engineer, about my son's project, and he was completely horrified by it. A lot of kids like to dig holes, especially kids who love fossils, but I hadn't even thought about the weight of 4 feet of dirt falling on a little body, so we knew we had to fill it back up as soon as possible. Fortunately for us, we didn't have to learn that lesson the hard way. Someone suggested we use the hole to plant a tree, a perfect solution after all of the years of diligent hard work that had gone into digging that hole. But since the hole was right next to the garage, we didn't want a big tree, and as I thought more about it, some kind of small fruit tree would be perfect. I ended up buying a cherry tree, since I love cherries and they're super expensive to buy at the grocery store. I settled on a species that is really hardy and doesn't require a whole bunch of extra work. And for this particular tree, I was advised to get at least two because it's not self pollinating. Perfect. I had another spot that needed a small tree too. So our trees arrived with leaves already last year, and we planted them right away. We'd missed the flowering season, and there was no evidence of cherries. Either the trees were too young or they'd been kept in greenhouses, safe, but also away from pollinators. My younger son, who loves cherries, was waxing poetic about cherry pie from our trees, and we had a lot of conversations about how that wouldn't happen for at least a few years. But this year, there was a smattering of blossoms on both trees. A couple of days ago, I looked and I saw tiny green cherries forming, the beginnings of what I hope will be good fruit. Whether we or the birds get to eat these few cherries that will form this year, it's a sign of hope for the years to come. It kind of goes without saying, but the trees have had no choice in where they were planted. Apart from me following the directions about sun exposure and planting at least 2 trees, and apart from being planted in what I hope is good soil and having people to water them and throw a sheet over them in a late frost, the trees are now pretty much on their own. They're no longer safe in the nursery they grew up in. They could contract a disease or be damaged in a windstorm, but now that they're out in the open, they can do what they're meant to do: stretch toward the life-giving sun, spread their leaves, provide beauty and shade, and of course, bear fruit. Humans like to think we've got infinite choices, and perhaps we've got a few more than your average cherry tree, but we don't, really. Where we grew up, our family of origin, the choices we made early in life, what we've experienced, our health, our education, all of these things inform and condense the actual number of choices in front of us, from infinite to a few, which is substantially more manageable, really. Even our faith isn't so much a choice as a constant hum beneath and through our lives. Jesus says, "You didn't choose me, I chose you." How you grew up, your life, your experiences, the way you've experienced God, what you've been told about God, none of these have been your choice. Faith is something we might pay attention to in different ways at different points in time, informed by the religious practices that help us most meaningfully connect with God. Martin Luther would argue that you can't choose faith, it just is. But that God chooses you, always. And because we have been chosen and planted like a cherry tree somewhere, perhaps not of our own choosing, but here we are, we get to do what we're meant to do. Like a cherry tree, we can't bear good fruit unless we're planted in good soil with the right amount of sun and water. We do a better job of bearing fruit if we're planted in community, and our fruit means nothing if we can't share it. Today's gospel reading is part of Jesus' farewell discourse. We've been hearing parts of it for weeks now. How appropriate that it comes right as term is ending. We abide in God's love, and God's love abides in us. It's mutual, and that mutuality gives us the strength to reach out bravely, even when what's next seems unsure. As Jesus says farewell, he reminds us that we are rooted in God's love, and that the good fruit Jesus tells us we have been appointed to bear is, after all, love. In the midst of events these past couple of weeks on campuses across the country, Jesus' commandment to love one another as God has first loved us feels difficult. It's difficult when we know there are at least two different groups of vulnerable people who need to be protected, and that many of us have friends who belong to both groups. It's difficult when we know that injustice is being meted out by extreme groups who strengthen each other in their extremity. Love requires vulnerability and trust. It requires that we set aside anger we might hold and wish the very best for those who have been declared our enemies. It requires that we see God's image born on the face of each person, and that is difficult. It feels like we might lose some part of ourselves. And yes, we might. But the part we might lose pales in comparison with the humanity we gain by seeking the best for each person, by declaring that God does not make throwaway people, by standing firmly rooted in the conviction that the only thing our God has ever really commanded us to do is to love. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote, "Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." How do we bear good fruit in a world that is so full of storms? With all of his fruit metaphors, Jesus was really onto something. If love is the root, branches will fall and die if they are cut off from it. And so if we are to bear good fruit, we remain firmly rooted in God's love, bearing fruit that is infused with God's love. Amen.